I'm Jan Szarawiński and you're watching TVP World Talks, where every word matters. The lightning-fast collapse of the regime in Syria has raised many questions concerning what's coming next for the war-torn country. These questions are also being asked in Europe, because in European capitals, when anyone mentions Syria, many leaders think refugee crisis. So will the refugee crisis actually repeat itself? Or perhaps will the situation in Syria cause people to return to that country, alleviating the crisis? We're going to ask these questions and more to our guest today, Nassim Abi Ghanem from the Middle East, from the Bard College Berlin, expert on the Middle East. Apologies. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Hello, thanks for having me.
So let us begin with the immediate future for Syria. Do you think that following the collapse of the Assad regime, Assad is now in Moscow apparently, the future of Russian military facilities is still uncertain, but that's beside the point. Do you think that the government in Syria, once it is formed, will guarantee that people will be looking at their country and thinking, okay, so this is a place where I can live once again, that the situation will be better and that it will be stable enough to ensure that those who escaped the country during the crisis will once again be able to re-establish their presence there and resume their ordinary lives?
I mean, surely the Syrian people are definitely hopeful of that and looking forward for that opportunity. Whether that is to actually happen remains to be seen. I think we will need to find out more on the different positions that the rebel groups will take when they're in government. So far, the signs have been slightly more positive with the HTS positions on in transitional government, but this, of course, on the long term is not certain, and there will still be question marks. So I think monitoring how the transition of power will happen in Syria would be very important. Of course, there seems to be a clear signal from HTC that they want to, in a way, whitewash their previous connection to Al-Qaeda or the ISIS, but this washing will also need to be translated into actual and practical terms in the governments. Of course, that's the aspiration of all Syrian refugees and all those who fled the country to be back and to rebuild the country they once lived and enjoyed. But of course, it's too soon to be able to determine right now. Although all the signals are positive, it's yet to be seen what the positions of other groups and regional powers will be to the new Syria.
So you wouldn't say that, that what some skeptics are saying. Some skeptics are pointing at Afghanistan and say, look, the same thing happened there. The Taliban was trying to build a new image for themselves. They were making pictures of themselves, in at fanfares, doing ordinary stuff, like trying to convince everyone that they have changed. And in the end, they did not. But is the situation even remotely comparable to what's going on in Syria, given that this is not just one group that was fighting to ensure the ouster of the Assad regime?
Of course, many have pointed already for the similarities with the case in Afghanistan. However, it's very important not to draw these comparisons and in the analysis, because the context of Afghanistan differs to a certain extent a lot to what is in Syria. The communities that have formed Syria and the history of Syria is very much different than that of Afghanistan. There are different ethnic minorities, a little bit more on in different fabric than that in Afghanistan, and so the comparisons cannot be drawn that quickly. Of course, that remains an example of how an Islamic group may want to present itself when it comes to power and then change quite quickly. That is a lesson learned to look at. But certainly to think that it would be the same without taking into consideration other factors and conditions that present themselves in Syria would also be short-sighted. I'm thinking of the first city that fell in the hands of these rebels, Aleppo. Aleppo is a very more cosmopolitan city it's a melting pot for different ethnicities and sects, and this is just a completely different setting than that in Afghanistan. At the same time, the rebels have already appointed one of the priests to be the governor of Aleppo afterwards. So, again, these are signals, but to draw the similarities and jump into conclusions that it would be exactly the same would be, again, too soon.
So, speaking of things which may be happening a bit too soon, some European countries like Germany, Austria, Denmark, apparently, they are already initiating processes to suspend applications for asylum from Syrians, citing that the situation is changing, there might be many different scenarios, but that is exactly the point, many different scenarios. There could be a positive one where we have a stable country, stable government, people being able to return. But what if sectarian violence erupts in certain regions? Is it even remotely possible to analyze this at this stage and just take this rash decision to say, okay, so we're suspending asylum applications? There might be many different reasons for these applications being filed. What do you think of it?
Absolutely, it's exactly what you pointed out. We start off with it's too soon. I think the European response was exactly the happy ending story that the European states really wanted at this time, with the rise of the far right and the narrative of anti-immigration. This is a great opportunity for the political parties that are not on that side to kind of jump on this narrative that once the situation has been cleared, then we are stopping this and possibly deporting and sending the refugees back. And of course, that is, of course, from a humanitarian perspective, way too soon and way too dangerous. Certainly opening that up for voluntary returns right now for everyone who wishes to, of course, is always on the table. But to jump and too soon into deportations and canceling asylum is, again, just it's a perfect timing to kind of try to join on this narrative of being not open for immigrants and stopping immigration, and in the hope that this would help the political parties in the upcoming elections. Just in the you mentioned these important elections in the few segments before that are coming up, whether in Germany or elsewhere. So yes, and that is an extremely a worrying sign, because again, it's way too soon, and it could be throwing people back into violence that may still erupt, and maybe the asylum seekers are still are afraid and are not willing to go back at this point. But again, this again shows that this priority has become the local economy and the narratives within the European Union and the European states, and not as too much on the humanitarian side of things.
So, of course, everyone wishes that it is going to be, as you've mentioned, a success story with a happy ending for so many people who have been forced out of their homes, forced out of the country, to be able to see it rebuild under a stable government which respects their rights. That would have been the perfect solution. But, of course, one also has to be prepared for contingencies whereby the situation does not go quite the way that we would have liked it to. Anyway, Nassim Abi Ghanem was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your insight.
Thank you.
And I'm Jonasz Rewiński. You're watching TVP World. Please stay with us for more latest news and updates.